thought it may be worthwhile to look at how temperatures are actually measured. It is very simple. They measure them at night at the lowest temperature, which normally occurs before dawn. So there we have it, the lowest temperature at night. Then they take the highest temperature in the day, and in this case, declare the average of the 5 degrees at night and the 15 degrees in the day. You simply add the two temperatures together, in this case it would come to 20, and divide by 2. As 10 degrees. So the average temperature in that spot on Earth for that day is 10 degrees. It's as simple as that. How can that go wrong? Well, it all comes down to location, location, and location. Just where you put that temperature measurement, where you put that temperature station really matters. I mean, for example, with the recent 40.2 degrees record temperature in the UK, you wouldn't put it alongside one of the runways in Heathrow Airport, would you? But that's exactly what they've done. They've taken the record temperature from this station at Heathrow, with all the jets not just taking off and landing, but also taxiing and turning so the jets go right onto it. It is unbelievable. This climate station is right in the middle of the urban heat island effect. It's in the middle basically of a city, and the whole area is subject to a much higher temperature than the surroundings. London itself is claimed to be 10 degrees warmer than the outside countryside areas. And besides the aircraft, there are of course all the vehicles buzzing around the airport all the time. You couldn't put a temperature station in a worse place than that if you want to measure the ambient temperature of the Earth at a particular point. So how does the Met Office defend the citing of this temperature reading? Well, it does. It says that the Heathrow readings are very similar to the readings at Kew Gardens, therefore they are right, which is absolutely absurd. So first of all, they give you this graph in defence of their claim, and it does show that Kew and Heathrow temperatures throughout time are broadly similar. Not surprising, really, because if you look at Kew, they're both inside the urban heat island effect of London. Kew is surrounded by buildings, and the temperatures there are still within the heat island effect of London, as is Heathrow. Whilst Heathrow, of course, has the extra effect of the jets and the very high traffic close to the temperature gauge. Frankly, no rational person would choose to have a temperature station at Heathrow, or Kew Gardens for that matter, within the urban heat island effect in order to try to measure the atmospheric temperature. No, the only rational purpose is to have high temperatures that can be used to cause alarm and create records. That's it. For the record, on that hot record-claiming day, there was a hot wind from the Sahara coming up, and it just happened to cross the very narrow straits near Dover, not having time to cool down on the water, no great distance, and then came over the southeast as a fairly hot gust. Yes, it was weather, not climate. And if you look at this charter temperature, you can see whilst it was hot there, it was much colder than normal back in the eastern part of Europe there. So in actual fact, the balance was very neutral. And the Earth as a whole on that day was 1/5 of 1 degree warmer than the average. The following days, it was cooler than the average, perfectly normal. So none of this is indicative in any way of global warming. Using terrestrial temperature stations, it is worth noting that because we know the average temperature used in climate models is based on the maximum in the day and the coldest at night, the average of those two, because we know that, increasing the nighttime temperature significantly will alter the average. And of course, this is what happens. With the urban heat island effect and other factors, such as wrong positioning of temperature gauges, you get the heat being absorbed in the day by the buildings, the tarmac, etc. around these temperature stations and being released at night as infrared, and that heat distorts more the nighttime temperature than it does the daytime temperature. Yes, it distorts both, but the nighttime temperature is affected more. And so by increasing the nighttime temperature, you increase the average temperature and get a rise in temperatures. The Environmental Protection Agency, USA, quote, "The term heat island describes built-up areas that are hotter than nearby rural areas. The annual mean air temperature of a city with 1 million people or more can be 1 to 3 degrees centigrade warmer than its surroundings. In the evening, however, the difference can be as high as 12 degrees centigrade, and it is this nighttime difference that lifts the average temperature reading for that place at that time. You simply cannot use temperature gauges in heat island areas for any sort of climate change purposes. So what does the Royal Meteorological Society have to say on urban heat islands? Quote, the real but local effect of urban areas are accounted for in the land temperature datasets used both by excluding as many of the affected sites as possible from the global temperature data and by increasing the error range. In other words, you're meant to exclude them as much as you can. And if you don't exclude them, they have to do all sorts of fiddled adjustments, which frankly, on another video, have shown to be wrong. So urban heat island temperature readings are really to be dealt with by suspicion, according to the Royal Meteorological Society. But what about the Met Office itself? Well, the Met Office, the one who defends the Heathrow climate station, says urbanisation results in significant modification of local climates, the most apparent expression of this being the urban heat island. So everyone agrees, it seems, that urban heat islands affect the temperature, and logic says they must. And by the way, if you want a more detailed look into this paper here, which you can Google, will tell you all about it. One of the conclusions of that report was this. The field experiment demonstrated that the impact of an encroaching artificial heating source on nearby air temperature measurements was much larger at night than during the day, and this factor is critical because, as I will soon show you, it leads to some very interesting conclusions. Now, in America, surveys have been done of the temperature stations. They have the best temperature records with the most stations in the world, and there it has been found that 96% of the stations were faulty. They were wrongly located. This weather station is located so that this bank of air conditioners blow hot air over it. This was reported to NOAA, who organised them, but they took no action. And this is typical of many stations. Here are just a few examples where I've also shown the infrared image to show you where the heat is near the station. This station at university used to be way out in the fields. But as the university grew over time, it ended up in the car park. And even this was being counted until the Heartland Institute, who fight this climate alarmism, pointed it out and forced them with publicity to drop the station being used. But there are even agricultural heat island effects. A single acre of corn can give off over 4,000 gallons of water a day. And of course, as is indisputable, water vapour itself is the biggest factor in the greenhouse effect. So how were we to get round then this problem of all these bad stations? Well, the Americans came up with a brilliant idea. Why not have 100 really good stations throughout America, temperature network, make this the reference network? These stations, I have to admit, are superb. They're very, very good. They've even got triple redundancy in them to get continuous records. So let's look at the temperature records from these superb stations since they were set up. Well, as you can see here, there are cycles. Yes, up and down, but if anything, if you look at this trend here, it's become cooler of late. And in fact, of course, the hot afternoons in America are no longer as hot as they used to be. There's been a cooling trend in the hot afternoons. But you'll still hear claims of record temperatures, this or that. This record, if anything, shows zilch change in temperatures. What you do not see is warming. So let's look at an alarmist fact check or claimed fact check on this data. What they say is it is simply false to claim that the data shows no warming over the time period. There is a warming trend. Well, that's just an assertion. So here's the reasoning that they claim is faulty. Even if the US experienced a flat temperature change for 14 years, which it has basically, that would not prove that the global warming isn't occurring, and I agree with that. The US only covers a small portion of the planet, and a 14-year period is too short to reliably indicate long-term trends over short-term variability. What I find remarkable about that warning, and they're quite right, 14 years is a very short time in terms of climate and not good enough to prove anything in particular on climate, but they even take a single individual weather event as proof. So it's amazing how the goalposts change when they're facing the facts. Let's now deal with the point that it's US temperatures only, and that's correct. What I've just shown you, US temperatures only. So let's look at worldwide temperatures from satellites. Well, the satellites show no warming at all over the last 7 or 8 years, but we really have to look at a longer period than that. This graph of satellite temperatures shows the differences between the 1991 to 2020 average. So that 30-year period average is the base, and this is the difference between it, that average, and what we've got. And as you can see, this first period is cooler. Well, that's not a problem because we came out of a very cool 1970s when there was an Ice Age coming scare. But look at this 1998-2000 peak. Really warm, suddenly very warm. We'll come back to that in a second. As we turn the century, with climate alarmism at its peak, we had a period of stability. No real change at all. It was known as the pause. And then, of course, as per the previous graph here, this section is when it steadied out again for the last 7 or 8 years. There are, of course, many reasons why natural climate change happens, and it happens on a massive scale with ice ages and so on. But even in moderate climate periods like this, there are many influences. And besides many other factors, there's the El Nino and La Nina effect from the Pacific Ocean. The El Nino effect is when it's warm, and the La Nina effect is when it's cold. So let's now take a quick look again at that 1998-2000 temperature peak. And there it is. Just look at the size of the El Nino effect at that time, almost certainly causing the warming. So there are many effects, including the sun like this, that have an effect. But generally speaking, if you just look at the cold periods, the blue part on this graph, and the red warm periods from the ocean, you will see the effect on world temperatures. There's certainly a direct relationship, but it is only one of many other factors affecting the overall outcome of the Earth's temperature. It is worth noting that there has been a 0.28 degrees centigrade warming since 1979. No argument about that. The satellite record shows that clearly. But the 70s were a very cool period, and they've taken it from a low base. If you extend back in time, you will find that the record that everyone accepted up to 1998 and the hockey stick scare showed that the 1930s were warmer than it is today, as was the medieval warm period and the Roman warm period. So even 1979 to 2022 is a very short period in terms of climate change. You are simply seeing a part of a cycle. Now, looking at the El Nino and La Nina effects over a longer term, here we have what was the 1970s Ice Age coming scare, a cool period. That was followed by the global warming scare here. Then, of course, we had to change it to climate change because now we steadied out after that and had the pause. So you could almost correlate the name of the scares, what they title them, with the ocean effects of El Nino and La Nina. But the IPCC are not even charged with looking at natural causes of climate change. They basically assume everything is due to man. You really cannot get funding for research into the natural climate change when it's so easy to get massive amounts of funding for anything that's a scare tactic. In any event, to end this video now, I'm going to leave you with our ex-Prime Minister's marvellous cure of how to get around the current cost of living crisis caused by the energy crisis, which has been totally 100% caused by government policies on energy for the last 20 and 30 years.
You have to look ahead and you have to beware of the false economy. If you have an old kettle that takes ages to boil, it may cost you £20 to replace it. But if you get a new one, you'll save £10 a year for every year on your £10 a year every year on your electricity bill.